Hello, everyone. This is going to be our Knowledge Society, our Unit 1 Knowledge Society's Lecture 3. I decided to put it up here on YouTube in case we're a little crushed for time, shall we say, next week. So I wanted to make sure that you had access to the lecture. So I'm going to go through, do a lecture. We'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to be able to discuss it also in class, if indeed I'm not able to do the lecture in class with you. Okay, so anyway, education and the social construction of knowledge. So I start with a couple of questions. How is our knowledge constructed by our daily social interactions? If you think about it, how do we gather knowledge? Where do we gather it from? Is it from talking to friends, our roommate? We're over wandering around in the cafeteria and talk to people. Um, do we access it on the internet? Do we have questions that we decide to consult who I call Professor Google to find the answers? So how do we become knowledgeable? And so I want you to think about that. Where does your knowledge come from? It comes from probably people around you, from external sources that you access. And so then the next question is, how much of I is really us? How much of our knowledge is actually knowledge that we gain from other people? I mean, experientially, how much do we actually go out there and experience things and learn from them directly? Most of us kind of learn secondhand, don't we? We learn from other sources about the world around us or about what we need to do or how we can do things. And then what constitutes society? When we talk about society, what do we mean? Is it just the people that we're talking to day in and day out, our immediate circle, or is it a greater circle of people? If you, for example, go to Facebook, I know that's not as popular among the younger set now, but people might have 1,000 friends on Facebook and can be scattered all over the world, and maybe you don't even actually physically meet many of those actual Facebook friends. So, defining what society is has become a little bit complicated, I think, for us as we go into the technological age. Um, there are two people, Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman, researchers, sociologists. Both of them unfortunately passed away, I believe, not so long ago, but they wrote in 1966 and published in 1966 a book called The Social Construction of Reality. And they see society as a human product, that we create society as human beings. Society doesn't exist unless we kind of decide or act on to organize ourselves into a society. So Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman are important to my discussion, and the work that they did so long ago, the social construction of reality. There they are. Um, a few other reasons I like these gentlemen is because both of them were bald, and you can see over here, he has a wonderful beard. Excellent. Okay. Um, in a nutshell, though, Berger and Luckman, they see Homo sapiens, us, as Homo socius, that we are a social animal, and that's very true. I mean, we don't do very well when we're all by ourselves, do we? I mean, yeah, it's nice. People like to have an afternoon to themselves, maybe even a weekend, a few days occasionally. I have a friend who likes to go camping for a week at a time up in the north woods of Michigan. Um, but ultimately, we need people. We need people to help us survive, but we also need people, I think, for our psychological well-being and health. And in fact, in some societies, when we talk about prisons and putting people in prison, in America, if you're put in prison, sometimes you will be punished if you get out of line in prison by being put into solitary confinement. That's where you have to be completely by yourself for 24 hours a day, and it can go on for weeks and beyond days. And there's some people who have been in solitary confinement for years. And there's some societies, though, primarily I'm thinking of European societies, that have a different view of prisons and prisoners and how they should be treated than maybe the U.S., who believe that solitary confinement is actually cruel and unusual punishment, that we are so in need of human connection that when you put somebody in solitary confinement where they're completely alone for day in, day out, hour after hour, week after week, that you are actually damaging them psychologically and that this is inhumane. Now, we do have cases, of course, of people who decide to become hermits. I mean, there's a great tradition of that in China, of the hermit of the mountains, for example. We even have that in the West. You know, we had hermits who, usually for religious reasons, would go forth into the woods or into the mountains and live alone, um, to commune with God or the gods, what have you. But generally, we as humans exist in societies, and they might be small, tribal, or larger, but we need each other. I mean, think about your day-to-day life. How would you get along if you didn't have other people around you? Where would you get food? Um, where would you get shelter? Where would you, how would you take care of yourself? So we need people. And we also need to understand, we see and understand ourselves as being a part of a society, and that society impacts all aspects of our being. We are a connection, kind of an amalgamation of everyone we know and those who raised us. Um, for example, I've told people, if we look at this religion as an example, people tend to be the religion that their parents were. They inherit that kind of even the belief system from their parents, and of course, the parents might belong to a society that has that belief system. Um, so we get a lot from those around us, our siblings, our parents, our peers, all of that, and they allow us to create, in a way, who we are. And this is from Berger and Luckman. Theoretical knowledge is only a small and by no means the most important part of what passes for knowledge in a society. The primary knowledge about the institutional order is the sum total of what everybody knows about a social world, an assembly of maxims, morals, proverbial nuggets of wisdom, values and beliefs, myths, and so forth. So you come to understanding that you're of yourself in a society. Now, some of you maybe are multicultural. You might have grown up in different parts of the world and exposed to different cultures. You might have, many of you, control of several languages. Um, so you are maybe a little bit of the exception to this in a way, but we tend to see ourselves within a culture, and we adopt the beliefs and the ideas and the morals and that of the culture in which we exist. Now, in a multicultural environment like the United States, sometimes we have a kind of an overarching culture of, America, with these ideals of democracy, freedom of speech, and these things, sometimes practiced completely, sometimes not. But then within that, we have smaller societies, maybe religious oriented societies, a Jewish faith, for example. Maybe people believe in that. Maybe they belong to a Protestant sect, Baptist or Methodist, or Mormon, perhaps, Catholic. Maybe they're even regionally. Okay, I'm from the Southwest of the US, I'm from the Northwest, and there's a certain kind of philosophy of life with that. Maybe somebody's vegan, and so they kind of have this, all sorts of things. But basically, we kind of adopt these from the culture that we've immersed ourselves in. We adopt um, our being from that in a way. In other words, we are always a product of all of the experiences and connections that we have in our lives. And to continue quoting, human existence is ab initio, from the beginning, an ongoing externalization. As man externalizes himself, he constructs the world into which he externalizes himself. In the process of externalization, he projects his own meanings into reality. I think sometimes it's easier to talk about this in a religious term, kind of with a view towards religion. Okay, so finding meaning in reality. There are some religions out there, some cultures that say, oh, if something bad happens, like there's an earthquake or there's a lightning strike, a house sets on fire, then these are messages of some sort, that they have meaning, these actions. It's not random, that maybe God's angry, maybe the gods are angry, maybe the people in the house did something wrong, maybe all sorts of things. So we externalize, we try to find meaning in the world. We don't like chaos as a species. We like some element of order. And so we try to figure out, and sometimes we put meaning on things that might actually not have meaning. Like if you see a black cat cross your path, some people in the West would say that that means that you're going to have a bad day, that it's an unlucky sign. If you break a mirror, people will say, oh, that means you might have 7 years of bad luck. So, I mean, these are folk tales and things. And then we create symbolic universes which proclaim that all reality is humanly meaningful and call upon the entire cosmos to signify the validity of human existence, that we exist for a purpose, for a reason, that there's a plan. For example, again, going back to this idea that we like order, we like structure, we like to have meaning in our lives. So if we can't find it, we'll construct it. We'll explain things. Why does it rain? Why does the sun come up in the west? All of these things we will try to explain. Now we have science that now allows us to explain a lot of things through experimentation and the building of knowledge that way. But in more primitive times, maybe we relied on myth, explanations of, why things occur. Oh, it's because of the gods, or because of this, or because of Apollo or Zeus, or, yeah, yeah, all sorts of things like that. Okay, so we try to put order on things. Again, we are a species that like order and structure. And a few ideas. One thing that my brother, John, is a Catholic priest. And he, for many years, was working in Phoenix, Arizona. I was there at the time also. And he was in charge of a homeless shelter, where people could come who were homeless and live for a while and hopefully get back on their feet and get into employment and get into an apartment or something. But John always talked about the fact that community happens. So he worked with a lot of homeless people and people on the streets, and they would create little associations of friends in a way out there on the street. Some of it was for protection. It's dangerous out there. And so they would kind of form into little groups. And maybe you could see that, some of you might have come to AIU. Well, what I'm saying is maybe you came to AIU with no friends, in the sense that you had nobody from your original high school coming here, your community coming here. So you had to kind of create, um, a community from scratch once you arrived. That happened to me when I went to college, because I went all the way from Michigan to the West Coast to Portland, Oregon, to go to undergraduate school, and I knew nobody at the undergraduate school when I first arrived. I literally had no friends, no associations, nothing. So I had to kind of build from scratch friendships. And of course, it started off, logically, your roommate. Okay, you got a roommate, so you kind of become friends, and then you get people in the dorm that you meet, and you start to kind of, you kind of very quickly develop a little association, people that you um, kind of click with, or that seem to be kind of fun and you get along with, you start to associate. And then now, you go to classes and you kind of build that social group up from there. And that's how it is. In America, especially, people tend to like to socialize, and we like to build our little societies around us and add members and things. And so that would be what would probably happen when you arrived here a couple of weeks ago. You started making friends, making associations, and that's very important. In fact, oftentimes when we send children to elementary school or kindergarten, especially kindergarten, I think parents are very concerned. Well, are they making friends? And the teacher will actually pay attention. Oh, yeah, they seem to be doing okay. Little Johnny or little Susie is making friends with other kids. And so that's a positive thing. They can socialize okay. If they don't socialize, sometimes we assume something's wrong. Maybe they're There have some issues, sometimes even mental health issues that we need to address if the kids are having trouble connecting and making friends. Okay, so community happens is what my brother used to say. Yeah, you get people out on the street, and they'll just kind of associate with each other in a way, and then kind of build a little community to take care of each other out there in that dangerous environment. And if we do not have a community or access to people, sometimes we have to create our own society. And I don't know if you ever watched the movie Castaway with, very, very interesting movie. Tom Hanks stars in it. And it's a story of Wilson I'll share. So this is a guy who works with people. He is one of in the movie. He was originally like when FedEx or one of these delivery services, working with people all the time. He was flying back home to spend a holiday with his fiance, and his plane crashed, and he was the only survivor. And so he able to kind of swim to or raft to a tropical island. So I think this took place in the South Pacific. So he's on this island and there's fresh water and he's access to the sea and food and coconuts and all of that. But he's completely alone. There's no other human being on the island. So there he is. He's alone on an island in the Pacific. You've got little FedEx boxes there from the plane that went down. And then things wash up on islands, right? And so he finds a soccer ball, and it's a Wilson soccer ball. And so he had cut his hand, and so his hand was bleeding a bit, and he kind of touched this ball. And when he lifted his hand, he noticed that it kind of made a face. So he made the face, and then he made the ball, the Wilson ball, into a friend, gave it hair, and he talked to it. Now, you might think this is crazy, but when I was in university, one of my professors who had been in the military during the Korean War talked about a situation that he was familiar with. They used to have listening posts in Alaska, to listen for, Russian bombers coming over the Arctic or over from Russia, because this is the Cold War back in the 1950s, right? And so they had these little listening posts. And originally they just put one person in each of these posts out in the Alaskan tundra off by themselves, miles upon miles, kilometers upon kilometers away from anybody else. And so they had very minimal communication with other human beings. Some of the men there went crazy when they were alone. Literally, he talked about one guy, he stopped communicating on the radio, and so they went to find him thinking, oh, maybe he got injured or something. They were concerned. And it turned out he'd gone completely crazy. He was talking to his spoon. He was talking to his spoon. He made his spoon his friend. And so he lost it. Well, what the military ended up doing was realize that we can't just send one person. We got to send a group. So they would send like, 3 or 4 people. They at least had communication. And that went much better than sending somebody off in the tundra for 6 months by themselves. Okay, but anyway, for years he was on this island, and Wilson became his friend. He would just talk to Wilson. So if we don't have community, if we don't have friends, we will create them. I think a lot of people who have pets, maybe they live alone and they want to have some companionship, so they get a pet, a cat or a dog, and you know how people talk to their pets. There's interaction. I mean, some of that's the same thing. And they discovered, well, one thing they do in some um, elder care facilities is bring in pets so that the cats or little dogs will wander around the place, and people will interact with the animals, and they relaxes the people, and they get happy because they have that connection with a cat or a dog that can come into their room. Maybe they have trouble getting out of the room and interacting, but the little pet will come in and they will have a sense of companionship then, and that's important. Okay. And then Lord of the Flies, I've been teaching Lord of the Flies for a long time. it's one of my lit course required texts, one of my lit courses, Lord of the Flies. William Golding was the author, won the Nobel Prize, pretty much because of the book Lord of the Flies, to be honest. And he talked about how society can change and break down. Also, for example, you start off these little young boys were their plane was shot down. It crashed on a tropical island, and so they go from being proper schoolboys into savages, basically. So society broke down. They tried to build a little society to mimic the adult society they were used to, but it broke down very rapidly. And we, this is one reason people are still reading this book after decade upon decade, is because we can see things like that happening so simply. Think about how quickly your society could break down if suddenly there was no electricity. Where would you, how would you get food and keep food? What would you do? What would your day be like if we suddenly took away electricity and heating and all of these accoutrements of the modern world that you're used to? What would your life look like? What if we took the internet away suddenly? Why does it do that? That was one of the questions that Golding says. Why do we do that? Why is it's society we think is so solid can also break down so easily? So, Golding viewed humanity as kind of, unfortunately, evil in a way, that he said evil resides within us, and it's society that keeps the evil inside rather than spilling out. And if you take the societal pressures off and societal constraints off, suddenly everybody's evil. It's a dark vision. But Golding had gone through World War II. He is familiar with the concentration camps. He saw what was happening in Stalin's Russia. And at the time that he wrote, he was also reacting to kind of these books that he himself had read that said that, oh, if you put kids on an island, castaways, they create a wonderful little society and all this. So he said, no, that's rubbish. It would be very much different. And he was a school teacher who taught an all boys school, junior high kids. And he said, even from my teaching experience, not my war experience, but my teaching experience, take away the rules, you have chaos, violence, and savagery. My wife told me this story also to give you an idea of how we can really be controlled in a way by our environment, that we become whatever our environment is kind of encouraging us to become. When she was in school in the 1960s, um, elementary school, very early elementary school, there's a little boy who had a lot of trouble dealing with being in school. He had separation anxiety and didn't want to be away from his mother and his father, and it was difficult. And so the mother would come to school. They were trying to keep him, okay, you can do this transition. You're going to be in this group of kids. Mom can leave, but it didn't really go well. And the school at the time, for whatever reason, just decided, okay, well, the kid has trouble, mental trouble or something, so put him in a special school. And so they put him in a special school with children who had developmental disabilities, even though the kid himself didn't seem to have any developmental disability. He had no cognitive issue. It's more like an emotional bonding issue. And yet he was, basically segregated away and put there. And my wife went, her class continued in elementary school. A few years later, my wife was in a little choir, upper elementary age choir, and they went to do a little choir performance at this special school because, just kind of socially proactive. And so my wife was singing, and she saw this boy who had been in her originally in her class, and she said his behavior was very much like the kids who had cognitive disabilities. In other words, even though he had no cognitive disability, um, he started to react like he did because he was surrounded by kids who behaved that way. And my wife said, she says, he did not have a cognitive disability. When he left my elementary school, he had an emotional connection issue, didn't want to be away from his mom. didn't want to make away from his father. Separation anxiety, we call it. Yet over the years of being segregated, put in the special school for those children who had cognitive disabilities, he started to behave like he did. So we are like sponges, especially at that age. We kind of like sponge in our environment and react according to it. This is one reason I think why parents are always very, very concerned about your peer group with the peer groups of their children, because they understand, at least intuitively, that if the kids with kids who take school seriously and try to do well in school and are behaving and not engaging in dangerous behaviors, then their kid probably will be that way. They will not engage in dangerous behaviors. They will be good at school, or at least try, and will behave appropriately. If you put the kids peer group is a type of kids who are getting into trouble all the time, don't take school seriously, then that's going to rub off, as we say, on their children. So that's why parents are always very concerned about the peer group. We also have this interesting thing when we talk about knowledge and society, and I just want to kind of mention this because I think it is important for us to remember. What is reality to us? How do we gauge reality? I mean, we look around, we touch things, we think, okay, oh, here's my cell phone. It's real. I got it right here. There's probably a text from my wife on there telling me to pick up milk after after work or something. Um, so we understand reality. We believe it because we see it, we smell it, we hear it, we touch it, right? That's reality. But what if you were in a situation where what you touched or what you saw actually wasn't there? How would you know that if you were actually feeling like you were seeing things or hearing things or smelling things or touching things? Yet other people observing you would say, you're touching nothing. You're just reaching off into the air. Um, you say you smell roses, but there's no scent of roses in the room. You say you hear voices, but there's no voice other than your own. Um, so schizophrenia is a mental illness that people suffer from. Professor John F. Nash won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1994, and he was very open about the fact that he suffered from schizophrenia. I met Professor Nash in Abu Dhabi when I lived there. We had this program where we would bring Nobel Prize winners and people who were entrepreneurs and all of that into our university, and they would have presentations, talks, and all of that. Um, it was a huge program, and I was working as administrator there, so they told me, "Oh, we need you to go and welcome and meet Professor John Nash at the airport." So I said, "Oh, okay, that'd be great. I'd like to go meet him." When I met him, well, he was interested because he had a person there who was with him, who was kind of taking care of him, and so I met him at the gate as he's coming out of customs of that, and I walked up and I little sign. I said, "Professor Nash, I'm Dr. Doherty. I'm here to meet you and to take you to your hotel." And then he kind of put his hand up for a second, and I said, "Oh, okay." I just stopped talking for a moment. And he leaned over to the person who was with him and said, "Do you see the man in front of me? Is there a man in front of me?" And they said, "Yes." And then she said, "Okay." And then he reached out his hand, and I shook it. And anyway, he didn't know. He doesn't know when he meets people whether or not they're real, because he will imagine that there are people in front of him or around him because of the schizophrenia. And it's like he can reach out and touch the people. He can smell their cologne. He can smell their perfume. Everything about them is real to him, in his mind, even though observers would say, "Professor Nash, there's no one there." That is schizophrenia, one form of it. I'm not an expert on schizophrenia, but I saw this. This is from a movie about his life. It's actually it's called A Beautiful Mind, and I do recommend it. It's an excellent film. I'm just going to show you a little few seconds of this one scene so you can see what I was talking about. Okay. Actually, I forgot to check if I am. Let me do something here. I forgot to see if I was sharing the sound as well. Let me stop my sharing for 1 second. I always forget to do that, so let me just see if I did. That I want to share. Okay. Well, I guess you just share now. That's all. Oh, okay. Well, that's good. So hopefully you saw that. I hope. Anyway, so he was meeting somebody new he never saw before, and so he had to, he talked to a student who he knew was real and asked, "Is that man here?" And they said yes. And so that's how he had to interact with the world. He understood that he had schizophrenia. He understood the situation he was in, and he made adjustments in his life and the way he dealt with people to make sure that he was dealing with quote unquote reality. There are two concepts also. After I've kind of gone down this path of talking about knowledge and challenges, how it's a social construct, but how do we become socially constructed? How does our knowledge base become socially constructed? They're basically two terms, phrases that I need you to remember. One is primary socialization, which we get in childhood. The other is secondary socialization. That usually takes place as you take your place in the world, maybe through schooling, formal schooling in most cases, but other sorts of rites and rituals that we go through. So primary socialization is when you're a child. This is basically where you're learning how to be a little human being. And who do you learn from? Your parents, your siblings, your immediate little circle will kind of show you how, okay, you don't bite people, you don't throw things, you eat with your fingers, you sit at a table, there's bath time, you go to the restroom over here, all sorts of things that we learn directly about how to behave, just how to be a good little human. And we learn that from our parents, from our family, usually, in most cases, okay? And it's usually emotional and deep, and it's also very accepting, almost unquestioning. Little kids like to ask questions usually, and well, we hope they do. If they're not asking anything, there might be a problem. So they're often very curious, but they take whatever the adult says or the older kid says at face value, which means they don't question it. They ask dad, why is the sky blue? If I told them, oh, because God threw blue ink and it's up there, they would believe it. This is the child, the kind of the beauty and also the kind of the dangers, I suppose, of childhood is that they're just very accepting. They listen to adults, they listen to older siblings, they do often what they're told with that information, and they try to understand their world and learn how to be a little human being in the process as well. Appropriate behavior. Also, this is where they start to get kind of the social mores. How do we behave towards other people? Who should we be? Should we be frightened of certain people, or should we be accepting of certain people? All of those things. And then secondary socialization usually takes outside the family. You go forth into the community and start learning about how to be a member of that specific community. Usually in most developed countries, it is, and undeveloped countries as well, developing countries, I should say, it's through, schooling of some sort. But even beyond schooling, it's like, joining a sports team or scouts or something. We leave our family and we start to learn how to behave in the greater society and to do so kind of as an individual, not as part of the family, but as an individual. And so again, most of it takes place in kind of schooling situations in our modern world. You go to elementary school, you go to junior high, high school. One thing, it's funny, I have a friend who taught, now she's retired, but she taught kindergarten for just decades. She taught kindergarten in Utah. Um, we'd gone to college together and stayed in contact kind of because she was an educator and I became an educator. And, so she helped me with some of my research when I was looking at certain things in elementary schools, for example. But anyway, I one time asked her, okay, what's a major, what's your goal as a kindergarten teacher, the first stage of formal education, kindergarten? What is your goal? And she says, my goal is to take these little kids and to teach them how to behave in a social group, how to share, how to take turns, how to line up, how to, be organized, all of those things. My job to teach them. And I hope the parents are helping, but I've got to do this so that the kids are then conditioned in a way that they can go on to the next stages of education. Okay, so you learn, that's what she wants. Make them understand that, okay, yes, you might be an only child at mom with mom and dad at the center of attention, but here, boom, you are part of a 30-person class and you have to learn how to behave appropriately and take turns and be polite to your peers and all of those other things and learn how to take instruction from teachers and that. So that's kind of secondary socialization. So primary socialization is with the family, usually learning how to be a human being. Secondary socialization is where you learn how to operate in a society outside the family. And you don't need to worry about this. This is just Berger and Luckman again. Social stock of knowledge. So you social word acquired through primary socialization. Childhood equals general knowledge of how to behave, how to be a little human, all of that. And then in the sub-universes, you acquire through secondary socialization where you learn how to behave in a group or on a team, or maybe you get to first or Baito, so you learn how to operate within an environment where you might have a boss and working peers and all of those things. Okay. So we build our understanding of society and our place in it as we go forth, getting older and moving away from the family. Also, when we talk about social reality, realize it's not static. It doesn't just stay the same. And it's open to multiple interpretations. In other words, what is social reality? I'll explain a little bit more with multiple interpretations. Um, what if the friend zone theory is wrong? Well, it's not. But how can you know for sure? That's just how it is. Well, people have believed Earth is flat for ages too. So sometimes everyone believes something that's just not true. And sometimes it's just you. All right. So social reality can go through flux and change where we understand, why things happen and what's appropriate, and our understandings can change as well. Um, you know, I it could be, for example, in the United States, I mean, maybe back in the 1960s, 50s, and that this idea of having separations between the races was something that a lot of people just believed. Unfortunately, some people still believe it's important, but more people believed back then. More people believed it. In the US, women, I think it was a credit card. Women couldn't get a credit card in their own name. They had to have, get married and get it through their husband, for example, until 1974. So society changes. Brown and Burst's Board of Education in the 1950s, I think it was 56, was it? Yeah. Um, you know, brought about this idea that no, we originally had these separate schools for African Americans and white children, and then Brown versus Board of Education said, no, that's not right. And so integration, it took time. There were protests, all sorts of things, but now, I mean, most people will say, well, yeah, we want our kids to interact with kids from other races, religions, all of that. And most people will see that as a good thing, learning tolerance, understanding, intercultural communication's important. So, that's a change. That's how social reality will change. 100 years ago, people said, well, of course you need to have separation. different groups. People don't need to or shouldn't have to interact. And now the social reality is that no, we want that. It should happen. So that's kind of what I'm leading to there. And why is a social construction of reality necessary? For number one, communication, points of reference, so we can understand each other. We talked about intercultural communication being challenging because you're trying to get people from different cultures to communicate, and often they don't have the reference points, the unified reference points, So, and then, for example, well, I'll give you an example. One thing, in the United States, at least when I was growing up, it's changing, and I think some of it's because of economics. But when you were 18, when you graduated from high school, you were supposed to move away from home. You're supposed to leave home. Now, sometimes if you're going to college, it was okay. You could live at home for a while, maybe, or a few months if you're going into the trades and getting your trade license or something as a carpenter or plumber or what have you. You might live at home for a bit, but they kind of like looked at you funny in society. If you were, older than, let's say, 20, 21, and you were still living at home, people would say, okay, why? And if you went to 30, then people would say, guy's got a problem, or lady's got a problem. You don't live at home. You should go out and become independent. That was the social reality of my time. So, but now in Japan, for example, it was quite customary, as I understand and as I've seen, for kids to stay home, maybe until they get married themselves, or, if they don't get married, just they stay, you know. So it doesn't have the social stigma, or it didn't have the social stigma that it would have had in the US back in the day. And so these points of references would be different. If I met somebody who's 25, if I'd just gone from America directly to Japan, didn't know anything about the culture, and then I met somebody who's 25, 26, 27 living at home, I might say, okay, what's wrong? And they might understand why I was thinking that was wrong. So difference, cultural point. So social construction of reality, understanding ourselves as part of a society and what the rules and mores of that society are, give us points of reference with our peers in that society. And I might ask you at some stage, think of examples of communication and miscommunication based on cues beyond language. Are there some things that, we can communicate that are culturally significant? For example, um, at least, well, maybe still, if you're embarrassed in Japan, how do Japanese often show embarrassment? Sometimes I've seen people like the hand behind the head, kind of this sort of thing, and that there are other ways we communicate culturally that, if you remove language from it, then it really does become kind of a cultural way of communicating. Like if you stand with your arms akimbo, like this, legs separate, it looks like you're kind of ready for a fight. You're serious, or there's a problem. I mean, if my mom walked out on the porch and stood like that and yelled, Patrick, and I saw her, I knew I was in trouble because she was, hands on the hips and she was serious. So, but other cultures might not see that. I had a situation also years ago when I was teaching in Arizona, and I'd worked a lot. I'd worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs for a while when I was in graduate school. And I'd studied a lot about Native American cultures. In fact, my master's degree in American history was heavily influenced, and I focused on Native American history and issues. But so I understood a lot about Native American cultures in the Southwest. Even when I was growing up, I'm in Michigan. Some of my best friends, who also went to my church, were part of the Potawatomi tribe. So I had that influence as well. But anyway, I had this one teacher complain about a student who was Native American because he said, "Kid won't look at me when I'm talking to him." And he was upset about that because, a lot of times in American culture, we say, eye to eye contact is important. It means honesty and that you're listening. So, the adult might say, you look at me when I'm talking to you. What this child was doing, though, who was, I think it's 14, 15, maybe, so child, everyone's a child to me now. I'm getting so old. But this kid was actually being very polite to the adult who was addressing him, because in his culture, which in this case was the Chiricahua, the Apache tribe this came from, you don't have eye contact with an adult if you're a child. You don't look directly at into the eyes of a senior. It's considered rude and aggressive. So when an adult is addressing you, to be polite, you lower your eyes and you look down and you listen to the adults, and that's a sign of respect. This teacher did not know that. And so the teacher was misinterpreting the actions of this child to assume that the child was being rude. Okay. So that would be an example. I'm sure maybe in class we'll talk about it, but what does language provide also? I mean, it does provide us labels for things. We communicate with each other through written language and spoken language. We also attempt to communicate internationally with certain symbols. You can see some here. This one actually is from the Middle East, camel crossing. You got to be careful with camels. They're huge animals, and if you're driving, especially it gets foggy in Abu Dhabi, believe it or not. You don't assume fog in the desert, but there's certain points where I would have to drive between Abu Dhabi on the coast and going to this place called El Ain, an oasis inland a bit, and I would take about maybe an hour or so to drive. And it was often very foggy in the morning when I would have to leave to get there, for early morning meetings and classes and all of that. And you had to be very cautious, because usually there were fences on each side of the road. But if there had been a sandstorm, then the, the sand would have come up over the fence, and it would provide an easy way for a camel to walk over the fence. And a camel is a huge animal, but it's also situated so if you're in a car and you hit its legs, its whole upper body is going to come through the windshield. So people would die every year from these types of accidents. So when they put camel crossing, you needed to be really cautious, because that meant camels were, contained in fencing around the area. But if the fence, something happened, well, you got a problem. And, then if you think about it, we use lots of things like over here. This isn't the Jolly Roger pirate fame per se, but this means that there's poison, for example. And you have biohazards, kids playing, electricity, radiation, all sorts of things there. And you can extend it. I mean, we've come up with a whole system of icons to try to express without language what should happen or what's available. I've always kind of liked this one. I think, okay, what exactly are they saying here with this sign? But anyway, you probably haven't watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was a movie came out in the 1970s about first contacts with alien species. And we had to figure out, and we had some linguists and people figure it out, a way to communicate with the aliens without language, because we didn't know their language. We didn't know if they knew our language. And so they had this kind of hand signals that they came up with that they felt, linguists, would communicate that we wanted peace, that we wanted, connection with the aliens. And so at one critical point towards the end of the movie, where the alien space captain came out, the linguist did the signs, and then the space alien captain mimicked that. And so that was the first connection, kind of, where we were speaking without language. And by the way, in 1972 and 73, we as a species sent out the Voyager spacecraft, and they were launched 1977. And so, well, 1970 Pioneer 10, 1970 Pioneer 11, and then we sent out two Voyager spacecraft in 1977. So that's like four spacecraft that went off to explore our solar system, but then just kept on going off into the emptiness of space. So we thought that, okay, well, after, these spacecraft exit our solar system, what if they get picked up or run into or, crash into some alien spacecraft or planet? We wanted to be able to communicate um, who we are and where we live. And so we put maps on these things out of gold, made out of gold foil and that, so they would be kind of indestructible in a way and last forever. So we showed like where the solar system was, where you find Earth, and then this is a man, this is a woman, and we had these symbols to try to communicate something to these alien species. And this is also a disc that we put on you can see the spacecraft again, showing where we are and explaining via mathematics and a few things some information about us. There's also a recording, a gold record that has greetings in multiple languages and a greeting from then President Richard Nixon. And so they're still traveling, they're still out there, they're still moving. Who knows? One day somebody might say, aliens might arrive and say, hey, is this yours? We found it floating in the cosmos. So the assumptions of social construction, and yes, you're going to need to know this, so make sure that you pay attention to it. Communication is voluntary, that we choose to communicate. You can talk to people, talk at people, but if they don't choose to engage, there's no communication. Knowledge is a social product that we connect and everything else, because we get information from other people, knowledge from other people, and we use it. Very little of our knowledge is actually firsthand. It usually comes to us from secondary sources. Theories can create worlds, constructs for understanding and comprehension. A theory could be a theory of the universe. It could also be a theory of theology, where, oh, there's God in heaven, hell below, live right, live wrong. These things happen. Okay. So anyway, again, make sure you know those. And think about time, by the way, just to give you an idea of how theories can construct universes. To the Greeks, for example, but others also. You could look at India, the Hindus, and other civilizations. Time is cyclical. Time never really starts in one place. It just kind of keeps going from destruction to construction and keeps on going around. The Mayas felt that time goes in this huge circle, and there's points where everything's destroyed, then rebuilt, but it keeps going forever in a circle. In a circle. In fact, in 2000 or 2012, there was supposed to be the end of a Mayan calendar, and things were supposed to be destroyed. Didn't happen, but the idea is that time goes through this constant construction, destruction thing. You could think of about it also like reincarnation, that you come back, you die, but then you come back as a baby and go through the life cycle again and die and come back. That's kind of this idea of circular time. Um, in the West, I would say Judeo-Christian Islamic viewpoints bring this forth. The idea is that time starts at a certain point when, like, a god created everything, boom, at this point. And time is linear. It goes from that point of creation to some sort of an ending point, maybe the universe destroyed or something, or there's a new rapture or something happens religiously, and then, new world emerges, but it's a linear thing. Time goes from start to finish. Okay. That creates, think about how that can create your view of the cosmos and the universe and your purpose and your being. If you believe in a cyclical time system as opposed to a linear time system. If you think that everything that goes around comes around, if you're going to be reincarnated, how would that shape your worldview? If you think everything started and then everything goes along a straight line of time and then we'll come to an ending point, how would that shape your worldview and your view of your place in the universe? The Matrix movies were very popular, and some people say they were based on Buddhist theology, who knows? But this idea that there was a world that we were experiencing in our minds that was not real, that you broke through, if you were certain people, into the real world. the real world being the world of, where there were machines and trying to control human beings and all of this. So the Matrix give us an example of how reality um, can be shaped, but then is also not real, kind of like a schizophrenic, a person who suffers from schizophrenia, I should say. Could maybe in their mind have what they think is reality here, but it just simply does not exist. And then we have this idea of concepts of self. So we have symbolic interactionism, that there are two sides. And in Japan, they actually, this part of culturally, you have the person's public face, the tatame. Yeah, maybe I'm mispronouncing that. And then you have the private self, hone. And so the public persona is governed by my culture's theory of personhood. I put a good face out to the crowd, out to the society. You behave. My parents were always concerned about, their kids' behavior and said, listen, what will the neighbors think if we misbehaved? So very much public facing. And then you have your private self, maybe to yourself alone or to your immediate circle of friends or family. And we all do this, right? We are different when we are in the public sphere, maybe in classes and things, as opposed to be when you're with those few close friends who allow us to be silly or funny or whatever, or crazy, and it's all okay. So we have a public and a private self. And they're often governed by my theory of my own being, learns from my interaction with others. Again, your friends might allow a certain relaxation of behavior, which is fine. But we know where that kind of ends, and where unacceptable behavior starts, that sort of thing. And then an archetype is a term that I want to introduce you to. An archetype is kind of our perception of something. So if I say the word mother, we immediately think of certain things like, okay, nurturing and female, that taking care of children, taking care of individuals, caring, nurturing, providing. Okay, if I say father, maybe you think, and again, we're going back kind of a little bit old here, but protector or, provider, that sort of thing. I mean, so these are archetypes we associate through society. And so we had, um, you know, okay, an original model or idea, the first concept is an archetype, and it comes from Plato's. He had something called idios, which is the theory of forms that are ideas. Maybe some of you studied Plato, you studied the myth of the cave, for example. If you don't know the myth of the cave, ask me, I'll explain it later. But if you have these terms, they resonate to people. Like if I say the word hero, you think of things immediately. If I say child, you think of things immediately. Mentor, maybe you think of something with somebody wise, somebody older, a senpai giving advice, a mother, a sage, like a teacher. In fact, to give you an idea, like with mother, wait, and what I mean by an archetype, we all have this idea of a mother, maybe nurturing, protecting children. And that's why, if you have these unfortunate cases, and they do happen, where you have a mother kill her children, and I'm using this as an example about how ingrained these archetypes are, it often drives people a bit crazy. People get very, very angry and upset if they find out that a mother has harmed or, heaven forbid, killed her children. One reason, I believe, is because it goes against the archetype that we have in most societies. And no, mothers are supposed to protect their children. They're supposed to be mama bears, and be protective and take care of the children. So when we find out about a mother who hurts her children or, heaven forbid, kills the children, it goes completely against the archetype. It makes us very upset. Um, and so, that's an archetype because it's ingrained in us, in our brain, that a mother acts like this, a mother is like this. And so when they're not, it impacts us almost psychologically. We have a visceral reaction to it. Rites of passage are important, and these are part of this secondary socialization. And they are meant to kind of allow us to move into the adult world. And nowadays, I mean, in developed world, we have rites of passage usually again are associated with some sort of schooling or maybe sports teams or things like that. A lot of it's around school. You know, you go, you graduate elementary school, kindergarten, and all of that, junior high. High school is usually a big thing, you know. In America, they have in Japan, I know that they have, you know, a lot of ceremony around finishing high school. And then, you know, when you get off into the adult world, maybe you go to college and there are associated rituals with college, rites of passage. Um, you know, when I got my doctorate, I had to go through and sit for, you know, written tests that went on for days, then an oral test that went on for hours, and then I had to write a dissertation and defend it. And so there were all sorts of things tied up into that, lots of academic rituals, rites of passage. And, you know, so our society has developed these rites of passage to allow us to kind of move into the adult world. Now, all societies have had rites of passage. I'm going to share with you there, Joseph Campbell was a mythologist. He studied mythology. He also was very keen on paying attention to the rites of passage that different cultures and societies had to kind of allow a person to go from being a child into an adult. So let me see. I think this will work. Maybe. There we go. Okay. Going to talk about Joseph Campbell, about a story he's going to share about this individual here and his experience with Native Americans in the 1830s, and about his ability, because he was a painter, um, and the Native Americans that he painted were intrigued by his paintings and honored by them, and that they invited him to actually see some of their really, really private rituals that normally nobody outside of the tribe would have seen, rites of passage. So initiation through trials. Okay, naturally, nowadays we would not normally put people through that, but But you know, my father talks about or talked about his experience when he joined the Navy, when he was drafted in the Navy in World War II, and how he had to go to boot camp. They call it boot camp. So you went to boot camp for a couple of months, and you know, it was where they took you from being a civilian into being a sailor, a soldier. And you know, my father recalled, you know, how they would wake you up at like 3 in the morning and make you get dressed real quick, and you had to go on a like a 10-mile run or something, or do 100 push-ups, and there was people yelling at you constantly, and a lot of you know, things psychologically they were kind of almost torturing you. But what he understood through that process, and not everybody got through. Some guys washed out, they said, where they just couldn't handle it. The military said, okay, you're not sailor material, you're not soldier material, so we'll send you back into civilian life. It was because, you know, he said they were preparing us for combat, you know, and you have to, if you think it's tough in boot camp, combat would be 100 times worse, where people are trying to kill you and you've got to kill others. And so all that psychological, you know, kind of torture, and that was to make sure that you could handle it, that you could get through and work as a team and actually survive out there and do your duty. So that was part of it. So this seems pretty harsh, getting these young men ready to be warriors. And by the way, the women also had different rituals of initiation into womanhood as well. These were rites of passage. So George Catlin, his portraits, these are few. I just thought it would be kind of fun to share of portraits he actually did of the great chiefs of the Mandans. And because of these portraits, he was able to go and to actually see. This is a Okipa that he wrote about, that he talked about, where these young men are well, almost tortured basically, but then shown through that they could survive, that they could come back, that they could be strong warriors. So my question for you, and maybe we'll be able to deal with it in class, is what are our rites of passage? What are rites of passage where we actually have to do something, survive something, get through something difficult, to then kind of say, okay, you've made another step into adulthood. There are all sorts of things out there, but we'll talk about this in class, okay? All right, and there's a few of my references. So thank you, everybody. We'll be chatting about this video, about this presentation. The slides are up as a PDF because it's a big, long presentation. So you can find that on our Moodle, our Ames page as well. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to stop the video recording as well. Okay, so again, we will be talking about this with timing, time allowing, when we get into class.